A massive Burmese python, over 15 feet long and thick as a telephone pole, coiled around a tiny bear cub. The baby's desperate cries echo through the dense Malaysian rainforest as powerful muscles squeeze tighter with each passing second. Death seems inevitable. But then, crashing through the undergrowth like a force of nature, comes something that will make your heart stop. A mother bear, eyes blazing with primal fury, launches herself at the serpent in what can only be described as the most incredible display of maternal courage ever witnessed in the wild. What happens next? Well, that's a story that wildlife researchers are still talking about 5 years later. Because this wasn't just about survival. It was about something far more extraordinary. Something that would challenge everything we thought we knew about animal behavior and the bonds that connect all living creatures. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications to catch more heartwarming stories like this one. Trust me, what you're about to hear will stay with you long after this video ends. Let me take you back to where it all began, in the heart of the Bornean rainforest, where ancient trees stretch toward the heavens and life and death dance together in an endless primordial ballet. Our story begins with Kala, that's what the research team would later name her, a 6-year-old sun bear weighing about 120 pounds. Now, sun bears might be the smallest of all bear species, but don't let that fool you. These magnificent creatures possess strength that defies their compact size, with powerful jaws capable of cracking open the toughest nuts and claws that can tear through tree bark like paper. Kala had given birth to her first cub just 8 months earlier, deep in a hollow tree trunk she had carefully chosen as her nursery. The little one, barely the size of a house cat even at 8 months old, was her entire world. In the bear kingdom, mothers typically raise their cubs alone, and Kala had been doing exactly that, teaching her baby everything about survival in one of Earth's most challenging environments. The rainforest where they lived was both paradise and battlefield. Towering dipterocarp trees created a canopy so thick that sunlight barely reached the forest floor. Orchids bloomed in impossible colors, while the air hummed with the songs of over 400 bird species. But beneath this beauty lurked constant danger. Leopards prowled the shadows, venomous snakes slithered through the undergrowth, and competition for food was fierce. For Kala, every day was about teaching her baby the delicate art of staying alive while finding enough honey, insects, and fruit to keep them both healthy. She'd spent the morning showing her little one how to identify the sweet sap of certain trees, how to listen for the buzz of bee colonies hidden high in the canopy, and most importantly, how to recognize the sounds that meant danger. But on this particular afternoon, as the tropical sun beat down mercilessly and humidity hung in the air like a thick blanket, something felt different. Kala's keen senses, honed by millions of years of evolution, detected a subtle shift in the forest's rhythm. Birds that should have been chattering had gone silent. The usual rustle of small creatures in the underbrush had stopped. Her cub, blissfully unaware of the tension, was playing about 30 feet away, pawing at a colorful beetle and making those adorable chittering sounds that never failed to make Kala's heart swell with love. She watched him with the focused attention that only a mother can maintain. But something was pulling at her instincts, a warning she couldn't quite identify. That's when she caught the scent. It was faint at first, almost masked by the rich, loamy smell of decomposing leaves and the sweet fragrance of blooming flowers. But it was there, musky, cold, predatory. The scent of something that didn't belong in this part of the forest, something that spelled danger for small, warm-blooded creatures. Python. Now, here's what makes this story so incredible. Most animals, even large predators, will avoid confrontation with a python of significant size. These serpents are ambush predators, masters of stealth who can remain perfectly still for hours before striking with lightning speed. A large Burmese python, and the one stalking through Kala's territory, was massive, can take down prey much larger than a bear cub. But Kala didn't know that a python was nearby, not yet. All she had was that primitive alarm system that evolution had gifted her, the instinct that something wasn't right. Let's talk about the python for a moment, because understanding this magnificent predator is crucial to appreciating the drama that was about to unfold. The Burmese python that had entered Kala's world was a female, approximately 16 years old and at the absolute peak of her hunting prowess. At just over 15 feet long and weighing nearly 200 pounds, she was what wildlife biologists call an apex predator, a creature so perfectly designed for killing that she had virtually no natural enemies in the adult world. Her body was a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. Muscles rippled beneath scales that shimmered like liquid gold in the dappled forest light. Her head, triangular and surprisingly small for her body size, housed a brain programmed for one thing: identifying, tracking, and capturing prey with ruthless efficiency. But here's what's truly fascinating. This python wasn't necessarily hunting for food. She had fed just 3 weeks earlier, taking down a young wild boar after a patient stalk that lasted nearly 6 hours. Now, what drove her toward Kala's territory was something entirely different: the search for the perfect place to lay her eggs. You see, Burmese pythons are incredibly particular about their nesting sites. They need locations that offer the right temperature, humidity, and protection from other predators. The hollow tree where Kala had raised her cub was exactly the kind of spot this python had been searching for. As she moved through the forest with that distinctive serpentine flow, her forked tongue flicked out every few seconds, collecting chemical information from the air. To us, the forest might seem quiet, but to her it was alive with scent trails, the musky odor of wild pigs, the sweet smell of fruit bats, and yes, the warm, milky scent of a young bear cub. Now, pythons don't typically hunt bears. They're opportunist predators, meaning they'll take whatever presents the best risk-to-reward ratio. A healthy adult sun bear would be a formidable opponent, armed with powerful claws and a bite force of over 800 pounds per square inch. But a cub? Small, inexperienced, separated from its mother? That was a different calculation entirely. The python had been following the scent trail for over an hour, moving with that patient, methodical approach that makes these creatures such successful hunters. She wasn't rushing. Pythons never rush. They're the embodiment of the phrase, "slow and steady wins the race." Meanwhile, Kala's unease was growing stronger by the minute. She'd moved closer to her cub, that maternal alarm system now screaming warnings she couldn't ignore. But what could she do? She couldn't see the threat, couldn't identify what was causing her distress. All she could do was stay alert and keep her baby close. The irony is heartbreaking when you think about it. Here was a mother doing everything right, staying vigilant, teaching her young, choosing what should have been a safe territory, and yet danger was slithering through the green shadows, invisible and patient and utterly determined. What happened next unfolded in the matter of seconds, but those seconds would be burned into the memory of every creature within a mile of that forest clearing. Kala's cub had wandered toward a log, attracted by the sight of honey oozing from a crack in the bark. It was exactly the kind of natural treat his mother had been teaching him to find, and his little mind was completely focused on the sweet reward ahead of him. He never saw the python. She struck from under the log, her body having flowed into position over the course of 20 minutes of patient stalking. One moment, the cub was reaching toward the honey with his tiny paw. The next, 15 feet of pure muscle had erupted from the shadows like something out of a nightmare. The python's strike was textbook perfect. She grabbed the cub around the midsection with her powerful jaws, her backward curving teeth immediately sinking into the soft fur. But the bite wasn't meant to kill. That wasn't how pythons worked. The bite was just the beginning, a way to anchor her prey while her body did the real work. With movements almost too fast to follow, she began to wrap herself around the struggling cub. This is called constriction, and it's one of nature's most terrifyingly efficient killing methods. The python doesn't crush her prey. That's a common misconception. Instead, she squeezes tighter every time her victim exhales, preventing them from drawing their next breath. It's death by suffocation, and it's usually quick. Usually. But this wasn't going to be usual, because 30 feet away, Kala heard her baby's cry. Now, I want you to understand something about that cry. It wasn't just a sound. It was a direct neural pathway to every maternal instinct that evolution had programmed into Kala's very DNA. That cry triggered a response so powerful, so immediate, that it overrode every other consideration. Fear? Gone. Self-preservation? Irrelevant. The logical calculation that she was about to face a predator twice her size? Meaningless. All that mattered was that her baby was in mortal danger. Kala's response was explosive. She launched herself toward the sound with a roar that shook leaves from the trees, a sound of pure maternal fury that had never been recorded by human ears before that moment. Wildlife researchers who later studied the audio captured by nearby monitoring equipment described it as primordial and otherworldly. But here's where the story takes an incredible turn, because what Kala did next defied everything that animal behaviorists thought they knew about sun bear behavior in crisis situations. When Kala reached the python, what she saw should have sent her into retreat. Her tiny cub was barely visible beneath the serpent's massive coils, his desperate cries growing weaker by the second. The python's body was thicker than Kala's own torso, rippling with muscle that could easily crush bones. Any rational calculation would have suggested retreat. Find a way to distract the predator, perhaps, or wait for an opportunity when the snake was more vulnerable. Sun bears are intelligent creatures, capable of complex problem-solving. Kala could have looked for a stick to use as a tool, or tried to climb a tree and drop down on the python from above. Instead, she did something that still gives wildlife researchers chills when they discuss it. She attacked the python with her bare hands. Well, bare paws, but you get the idea. Kala threw herself at the serpent's head with complete abandon, her claws raking across scales that had evolved to resist exactly this kind of assault. The python, caught completely off guard, released her grip on the cub and turned to face this new, unexpected threat. What followed was a battle that lasted nearly 10 minutes, an eternity in the animal kingdom, where most predator encounters are decided in seconds. The python tried to bring her massive body to bear, attempting to wrap herself around Kala the same way she had the cub. But Kala was no helpless baby. She was a full-grown bear, armed with 4-inch claws and powered by a mother's desperate love. The forest erupted in chaos. Trees shook as the two predators rolled and thrashed. The python's powerful tail whipped through the air, splintering branches and sending debris flying in all directions. Kala's roars echoed through the canopy, answered by the alarmed calls of hundreds of other forest creatures who had never heard such sounds before that moment. And through it all, the little cub lay motionless where the python had dropped him. Here's what makes this battle so remarkable from a biological standpoint. Both animals were fighting completely outside their normal behavioral patterns. Pythons are ambush predators who rely on stealth and surprise. They don't engage in prolonged combat with large, dangerous prey. When threatened, their usual response is to flee. Sun bears, meanwhile, are typically conflict avoidant. They're powerful, yes, but they use that power defensively, preferring to intimidate potential threats rather than engage in direct combat. A mother bear will usually try to move her cubs away from danger rather than confronting a predator of this size. But maternal love had transformed both the rules of engagement and the calculations of survival. 7 minutes into the battle, something extraordinary happened. The python, despite her size advantage, was beginning to tire. You see, constrictor snakes are built for short, intense bursts of energy. They're not designed for extended combat. Their hunting strategy depends on overwhelming their prey quickly and efficiently. Kala, on the other hand, was just getting started. Bears have incredible endurance, and the adrenaline coursing through her system had unlocked reserves of strength she never knew she possessed. Every time the python tried to coil around her, Kala's claws found purchase on the serpent's scales, creating wounds that made it increasingly difficult for the snake to maintain her grip. But the real turning point came when Kala managed to get her jaws around the python's neck, just behind the head. This is the most vulnerable spot on any snake, where the spine comes closest to the surface and the protective muscle layer is thinnest. The python, feeling the bear's powerful bite beginning to compromise her spinal column, made a decision that probably saved both their lives. She released her coils and began to retreat. Now, here's where the story becomes truly incredible, because what happened next challenges everything we thought we knew about predator behavior. As the python slithered away, injured and defeated, Kala didn't pursue. She could have pressed her advantage, could have followed the wounded serpent and ensured she would never threaten another bear cub. Instead, she did something that left the research team speechless when they later reconstructed the event. She turned her back on the python and ran to her cub. The little one was unconscious, but breathing. The python's constriction had been interrupted before it could be proved fatal, but the cub was severely injured. His breathing was shallow, his little body limp and unresponsive. What Kala did next was captured on a motion-activated camera that had been installed just 40 feet away as part of a long-term study on sun bear behavior. The footage, when the researchers discovered it 3 weeks later, would revolutionize our understanding of animal intelligence and emotional capacity. Kala gently picked up her unconscious cub and began what can only be described as a form of primitive CPR. She positioned him on her lap and began pressing rhythmically on his chest, pausing every few compressions to breathe into his tiny nostrils. Now, let me be clear. There's no evidence that sun bears have any innate knowledge of resuscitation techniques. What Kala was doing wasn't learned behavior. It wasn't something her own mother had taught her. It was pure instinct, driven by a mother's desperate need to save her baby's life. And incredibly, impossibly, it worked. After nearly 5 minutes of this primitive resuscitation, the little cub's eyes fluttered open. He took a gasping breath, then another, and then he was crying again, the most beautiful sound her mother had ever heard. But the cub wasn't out of danger yet. He had internal injuries from the python's constriction, and he was going into shock. His body temperature was dropping, his breathing remained labored, and he couldn't stand on his own. This is where Kala's story transitions from incredible to absolutely miraculous. Instead of trying to move her injured cub back to their den, Kala made a decision that would puzzle wildlife experts for years to come. She began to carry him deeper into the forest, toward a destination that seemed to make no logical sense. She was heading for the river. The research team, when they later traced her path using GPS collar data and paw print analysis, discovered that Kala had traveled nearly 2 miles through dense forest, carrying her injured cub the entire way. But here's what's truly astounding. She wasn't heading for just any part of the river. She was going to a specific location where a natural hot spring fed into the main waterway, creating a warm, mineral-rich pool that local indigenous tribes had used for healing purposes for centuries. How did she know about this place? How did she know that the warm, mineral-rich water might help her injured cub? These questions remain unanswered, but what happened next was captured on another research camera and documented by a team of primatologists who were studying orangutan behavior near the river. When Kala reached the hot spring, she didn't hesitate. She waded into the warm water, still carrying her cub, and gently lowered him into the mineral-rich pool. The little one was barely conscious, but as the warm water enveloped his injured body, something remarkable began to happen. His breathing, which had been shallow and rapid, began to slow and deepen. The warmth helped his body overcome the shock, while the minerals in the water, including high concentrations of sulfur and magnesium, appeared to have a therapeutic effect on his injuries. For the next 6 hours, Kala remained in that pool with her cub, supporting his small body and keeping his head above water. She didn't eat, she didn't drink, she didn't even sleep. She just held her baby and waited, with a patience that would have impressed even the python who had started this whole ordeal. The primatology team, led by Dr. Sarah Chen, watched this entire vigil through telephoto lenses from a research blind nearly 300 meters away. Dr. Chen later described the scene as the most profound display of maternal devotion I have ever witnessed in 30 years of studying animal behavior. As night fell over the forest, something miraculous happened. The little cub, who just hours earlier had been fighting for his life, began to show signs of recovery. He started moving more actively in the water, making soft vocalizations, and even attempting to paddle on his own. By dawn, he was strong enough to climb onto his mother's back as she waded out of the healing pool. The journey back to their territory took 3 days. Kala moved slowly, stopping frequently to let her cub rest and to forage for the softer foods he could manage with his still tender injuries. But with each mile they traveled, the little one grew stronger and more alert. On the second day, researchers following at a respectful distance observed something that made them realize this story was far from over. Kala wasn't just traveling randomly. She was following a very specific route, making deliberate detours to visit particular trees and clearings. She was introducing her cub to other members of their extended community. You see, sun bears aren't completely solitary creatures. While they don't live in family groups like some other bear species, they do maintain loose social networks, particularly related females who share overlapping territories. What Kala was doing was essentially spreading the word about what had happened, sharing her cub's survival story with the other bears in their region. At each meeting, the interaction followed a similar pattern. The other bear would approach cautiously, sniff both Kala and her cub extensively, and then engage in what can only be described as a greeting ceremony.
The adult bears would make soft vocalizations while gently touching the little cub with their noses and paws. Dr. Chen's team documented 7 of these encounters, each one reinforcing their growing belief that they were witnessing something unprecedented in sun bear social behavior. But the most incredible encounter was yet to come. On the morning of the 3rd day, as Kala and her cub made their way through a grove of wild fig trees, they encountered another mother bear with 2 cubs of her own. This wasn't unusual. Such meetings happened regularly in areas with abundant food sources. What was unusual was what happened next. The other mother bear approached, following the usual greeting protocol. But when she caught the scent of Kala's cub, her behavior changed dramatically. She became agitated, circling them repeatedly while making urgent vocalizations. At first, the research team thought this might be territorial aggression. But Dr. Chen noticed something odd about the other bear's behavior. She wasn't displaying the typical signs of threat or dominance. Instead, she seemed concerned. That's when they realized what was happening. This other mother bear had also encountered the python. Through careful analysis of GPS collar data and behavioral observations, the research team was able to piece together an incredible timeline. The python that had attacked Kala's cub had been hunting in this area for nearly 2 weeks. During that time, she had successfully taken prey from several different territories, including at least 3 other bear cubs. The mother bear that Kala had encountered was one of those who had lost a cub to the same predator. Her agitated behavior wasn't aggression, it was recognition. She was responding to scent markers that identified the python, markers that still clung to Kala and her surviving cub. What happened next challenged every assumption the research team had about sun bear's social intelligence. The bear of mother began leading Kala toward a specific location, vocalizing urgently and constantly looking back to ensure they were following. After nearly an hour of travel, they arrived at a clearing where the research team made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the wildlife biology community. The clearing contained evidence of not 1, not 2, but 5 separate python attacks over the past month. Scattered fur, broken branches, disturbed ground, all the signs of the life and death struggles that had played out in this seemingly peaceful grove. But more importantly, the clearing contained something else. 4 other mother bears, each one displaying the same agitated, purposeful behavior they'd observed in their guide. Dr. Chen's team was witnessing the formation of what could only be described as a hunting party. These mothers, each having lost cubs to the same predator, had been gathering and sharing information through scent marking, vocalizations, and behavioral cues. They had identified the python as a persistent threat to their community, and they were organizing a response. Kala's arrival with her surviving cub was the final piece of the puzzle. She was the only one who had successfully fought off the serpent, and her cub carried scent markers that could help them track the python to its lair. What they about to witness would rewrite the textbooks on sun bear social behavior and cognitive ability.
The python, meanwhile, had found exactly what she was looking for: a perfect nesting site in the hollow of a massive strangler fig tree. She had begun laying her eggs 3 days earlier and was now in the vulnerable position that all snake mothers face, committed to protecting her clutch and unable to move far from the nest. The bear's strategy was sophisticated beyond anything previously documented in sun bear behavior. They approached the nesting tree from multiple directions, using the complex root system of the strangler fig as cover. The 2 trackers confirmed the python's location, while the flankers positioned themselves to prevent escape. When Kala made her move, it wasn't with the desperate fury of a mother protecting her young. This was calculated, strategic, and devastatingly effective. She had learned from their first encounter: understanding now how to use her speed and agility to avoid the python's coils while maximizing the damage from her claws and teeth. The python, caught off guard and unable to abandon her eggs, fought fiercely but was severely disadvantaged. Within minutes, the other mothers had joined the attack and the outcome was inevitable. But here's where the story takes another extraordinary turn, because what happened after they defeated the python would challenge everything we think we know about animal morality and justice. When the python was finally subdued, mortally wounded but still alive, the bears made a decision that left Dr. Chen's team speechless. Instead of finishing off their enemy, they stepped back and allowed her to return to her nest. The python, using the last of her strength, coiled around her eggs in a final act of maternal protection. There, in the hollow of the strangler fig, she died, as mothers have died since the beginning of time, protecting the next generation. The bears, these grieving mothers who had lost their own young to this predator, stood vigil around the tree for nearly an hour. They didn't attack the eggs. They didn't destroy the nest. They simply watched. Dr. Chen later wrote in her research notes, "I have spent my entire career trying to understand the inner lives of animals, and in that moment, I felt like I was witnessing something sacred. These bears, who had every reason to destroy those eggs, chose instead to honor the universal bond of motherhood." When the vigil ended, the bears dispersed, each returning to their own territory. The crisis that had brought them together was over, and life in the forest could return to normal. But for Kala and her surviving cub, normal would never quite be the same. In the weeks that followed, researchers documented remarkable changes in sun bear behavior throughout the region. Mothers began staying closer to their cubs, traveling in more coordinated patterns and displaying heightened levels of intergroup communication. It was as if Kala's victory and the subsequent group hunt had awakened something dormant in the local bear population, an understanding that they were stronger together than alone. Kala's cub made a complete recovery, growing stronger and more confident with each passing day. But he retained behavioral changes that researchers found fascinating. He was more alert than typical cubs his age, more responsive to his mother's warning calls, and demonstrated an unusual ability to identify and avoid potential threats. More importantly, he showed no signs of the trauma that might have been expected from such an ordeal. Instead, he seemed to have developed what psychologists might call resilience, the ability to bounce back from adversity and emerge stronger than before. Dr. Chen's team continued monitoring the family for 6 months after the python encounter. During that time, they documented something unprecedented. Kala began deliberately exposing her cub to controlled danger situations, teaching him not just how to avoid threats, but how to assess and respond to them. She was preparing him for a world where mothers sometimes have to fight pythons and communities sometimes have to band together against common enemies. The story of Kala and her cub began spreading far beyond the Bornean rainforest. Dr. Chen's research paper, published in the Journal of Animal Behavior, became one of the most cited studies in wildlife biology. Videos captured by the research team's cameras went viral, touching hearts around the world. But more than just inspiring awe, Kala's story began changing how people thought about conservation. Local communities, many of whom had viewed bears as dangerous pests, began seeing them as complex, intelligent creatures deserving of protection.
The Malaysian government expanded protected status for the region where Kala lived, creating a corridor that connected several fragmented forest patches and allowed bear populations to thrive. International conservation organizations used Kala's story to raise awareness about the challenges facing Southeast Asian wildlife. Donations poured in to support research and protection efforts, funding expanded monitoring programs and anti-poaching initiatives. Even more remarkably, the story began influencing how researchers approached the study of animal behavior. Kala's actions had demonstrated levels of problem-solving, social coordination, and emotional complexity that challenged existing scientific paradigms. Universities around the world began redesigning their animal behavior curricula, incorporating new understandings about animal intelligence and social structures. Graduate students flocked to the field, inspired by the possibility of discovering other examples of complex animal societies and relationships. 2 years after the python encounter, something extraordinary happened that would provide the perfect conclusion to our story. Kala and her 3 cubs were foraging in their favorite grove of fruit trees when they encountered a familiar scent. Not the musky, threatening smell that had once spelled danger, but something else entirely. Something that made Kala pause and tilt her head in confusion. Following the scent trail, they discovered a juvenile python barely 4 feet long that had become entangled in a fallen branch. The young snake was struggling weakly, clearly injured and unable to free itself. This python was one of the offspring from the nest that Kala and the other mothers had chosen to spare 3 years earlier.
What happened next encapsulated everything that made Kala's story so remarkable. Instead of seeing an enemy to be destroyed, Kala approached the trapped python with curiosity rather than aggression. Her cubs, following their mother's lead, watched intently as she carefully used her claws to free the young serpent from the entangling branches. The python, once freed, didn't flee immediately. Instead, it remained motionless for several seconds, as if somehow understanding that it had been helped rather than harmed. Then, with fluid grace, it disappeared into the undergrowth. Dr. Chen, who witnessed this encounter through remote cameras, later wrote, "In that moment, I understood that Kala's story was never really about revenge or justice. It was about the recognition that mothers of all species share common ground, the instinct to protect, nurture, and ultimately to choose compassion over conflict when given the opportunity." As our story draws to a close, it's worth reflecting on the profound lessons embedded in Kala's journey. In a world that often feels dominated by violence and conflict, her story offers a different narrative. One where love conquers fear, where communities unite against common threats, and where even former enemies can find common ground. Kala's actions challenged our assumptions about animal intelligence, social structures, and emotional capacity. But more than that, they reminded us of the universal power of maternal love and the incredible things that become possible when that love is backed by courage, determination, and community support. The bear cub that once lay dying in a python's coils grew up to become a healthy, confident adult who would go on to have cubs of his own. The community of bears that came together to address a common threat developed social bonds that enriched their lives and improved their survival prospects. The forest ecosystem found a new balance that allowed multiple species to coexist more successfully. And somewhere in that forest, descendants of both the bears and the pythons continue the eternal dance of predator and prey,
parent and child, individual and community that has shaped life on Earth for millions of years. But now, thanks to Kala's example, that dance includes new steps, ones that acknowledge the complexity of animal societies, the power of cooperation, and the possibility that even the most fundamental relationships in nature can evolve towards something more sophisticated and, dare we say it, more compassionate. For those interested in the scientific implications of Kala's story, the discoveries made by Dr. Chen's research team have revolutionized several fields of study. In animal cognition, Kala's problem-solving abilities, from her improvised CPR techniques to her knowledge of the healing hot springs, provided evidence that sun bears possess what scientists call insight learning. This is the ability to solve problems through understanding rather than just trial and error, suggesting much higher intelligence levels than previously recognized. The coordinated hunt organized by the bereaved mothers demonstrated advanced social cognition, including the ability to plan complex group activities, assign roles based on individual strengths, and communicate detailed information through nonverbal cues. These behaviors were previously thought to exist only in species like wolves, dolphins, and great apes. Perhaps most significantly, the bear's decision to spare the python's eggs suggested what some researchers interpret as a form of moral reasoning, the ability to make ethical choices that go beyond immediate self-interest. While this interpretation remains controversial, it has opened new avenues of research into animal ethics and decision-making. The story also provided valuable insights into animal trauma and recovery. The cub's resilience and subsequent behavioral adaptations have informed both wildlife rehabilitation programs and, surprisingly, human psychological therapy approaches.